and I get to welcome my good friend Erich Campbell to another session where we learn some stuff. So today we're going to learn all about the top 3 embroidery mistakes that shops make. So Erich, welcome. Thanks for hanging with us today.
Well, thank you for having me on. I mean, this is, as people know, I can't stop talking embroidery even when I try. So it's not like I wasn't going to be even talking to myself about this topic today, but very happy to do it with your audience.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to get started. And before we get going, I just want to let everybody know that Erich's welcome to take questions. Yes. And he's here for that. So if you've got a burning desire to get that question answered, please, please, please leave it in the comment. The other thing is, I want you to put something in the comment anyway. Say hello, say where you are, what city you're from, what'd you have for lunch, anything. Just put it in the comment, will you?
Come on, people. Now, interact. It's always good. Plus, one of the best things that ever happens with these lives is when someone has a question so good that it derails the topic and it's better than what you prepared. I think that's the best option ever for me.
Yeah, so. Who's got the stumper?
Yeah, come on. Get out here with it. I'm ready for it.
All right, so we got a couple of people watching. Corey, Ashley Rich.
Somebody got tagged in.
Says hello. Alan Howe says the embroidery whisperer.
Alan is far too kind. Thank you, Alan.
Right, and then we got Sharon says hello from Rock Hill, city of Rock Hill, South Carolina.
Hello, Sharon.
And Mike says howdy from Calgary, Canada.
Nice. Mike is a frequent listener on my other podcast, so great to have Mike in here and Justin. Great to see you guys. Jeff.
Alan wants to know if he can ask you a screen print question. Alan, why don't you do that just to see if Erich knows anything?
I don't. I promise you, you can stump me really easily.
Yeah. Jeff says hello, and Keith says, hey, guys.
Oh, good to see you, Keith.
All right, so let's get to the topic here. Bam.
Let's do it.
Top 3 mistakes that embroidery shops make.
Well, and here's the thing. First, I know that this sounds like a YouTube video title, guys. I mean, top 3. This is top 3 kind of categorically, but there's lots of mistakes people make that we want to cover. These are categories that I think broadly encompass the problems that people have the most. So it's going to be a little bit of embroidery and digitizing technical stuff and a little bit of business, because honestly, I think they usually stem from the same problems, the same like basic assumptions people make cause problems on both sides, both on the process side and on the sales and business side, if you want to call it that. Not that any of this is a business. So with that, let's go ahead and start with like the number one thing that I want to put out there. And this is more on the technical embroidery side, but that is misunderstanding the medium. Right, misunderstanding the medium, especially for people who come to embroidery from something else. You come to it from print, from digital, from heat press, anything else you come to it from. Pretty frequently, they look at an embroidery machine like a thread printer. Like, we're going to slot the shirt into this thing, and it's going to take off, and there's a really precise way that we can do this, that it's the same every time. But embroidery as a medium, we have thread under tension. We're going to have a needle involved. There's stabilizers, and we're going to jam that needle and thread through a garment thousands of times every time we make an image. So invariably, there's a lot of tensions and pull and push, distortion and compensation, and people don't really kind of get that. And then they judge this thing like a print. They look at it too closely. They view it at 3 inches on, which means that they see detail issues or roughness around edges, things that need to be judged at 3 feet, not 3 inches. And they have a tendency also not to do things that relate to the medium itself. They don't sample on garments that you'll see people sampling on like stacks of stabilizer. They don't sample on a piece of material that's analogous to the shirt they're going to run. And so they don't actually get a result that they can use when they're sampling. It means nothing because it's not being sampled in what I would call kind of a scientific way. So the top mistake people make, they misunderstand the medium. They don't really know embroidery, thread, fabric, the nature of the fabric, the nature of the stabilizer, the nature of the thread, tension. They don't understand quite how the machine works. So when they go to troubleshoot, like they'd have design problems, maybe registration problems, something like that, they just start throwing things at the wall, and anything someone tells them in a Facebook group, they just try. They don't understand why they try it. They just try it. Somebody says use different stabilizer, they just throw the stabilizer on there. Somebody says drop your tensions, they just do it. Nobody kind of asks the why behind it. And in misunderstanding the medium, not knowing what embroidery is or what it's capable of, what the fabric does, how they interact with each other, they tend to just throw stuff at the wall and see if it sticks. And they also, in the business side of this thing, don't really communicate very well to their clients what embroidery's strengths are, what you can and can't do, and they don't deal with kind of mitigating expectations on the front end. So that's
hold on. So you're telling me there's science and physics to this stuff?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely there is. Every satin stitch, well, a column of satin stitches will always get narrower. It's what people say is pull compensation. That's distortion. A stitch is under tension. As you stack stitches next to each other in a satin stitch or in a fill stitch, they roll off of each other and push to the open ends of that column. And like a capital I, a column of satin stitches will get taller and narrower every time. So what's on your screen is never what's on the machine. And so people trust that screen and they end up making mistakes, especially if they're trying to digitize themselves. That's the other thing that's part of this. People will try to tackle too much at once and say, I'm going to bring in embroidery. I'm going to become an embroidery designer, digitizer, embroiderer, all in one go and learn how to sell this thing. And we're going to just bring in equipment. Just go straight to equipment from the first idea that they're going to do embroidery. And it's sometimes, I mean, I wouldn't say fatal. I don't think failure is fatal if you learn from it, but it certainly sets them back when they do it and they don't think about it first or try and understand some of these things. Or, hey, if you don't know this stuff, you don't want to get super technical, cool, you don't want to go deep on this, hire someone who does or outsource. There's nothing wrong with that, even if you're going to bring it in eventually. You know, refine your mix. Start with outsourcing, bring in equipment and change your mix and change the levels as you go. Nothing wrong with that. So yeah, no, I mean, it's a little bit of everything. It's testing, it's tools. It's also not understanding that all embroidery is an interpretation of art. It's never a reproduction. Now I know if I talk to you guys who do know screen print really well, you're going to be like, Eric, come on, man. It's not the same as an inkjet printer. Like there's interpretation, there's stuff we have to change to make it work in printing. And I do know enough to know that. But I would say that with embroidery, it's frequently that we literally cannot print text of a certain size. We can't embroider that, or we can't embroider something on a certain garment or in a certain position because the physicality of running that needle through that garment won't work, or the sizing literally won't work. The minimum size for a satin stitch that runs well with 40 weight thread, the standard thickness of thread, is about 1 millimeter, 1 to 1.2 millimeters. We're not going to get a satin stitch any thinner than that, no matter what we do. Now we can play with that. We can use thinner thread, we can use thinner needles, but all of these things introduce more complexity into the execution of the embroidery. So if you don't know that stuff, like right now I said 40 weight thread, and there's somebody with an embroidery machine in their place who doesn't know exactly what the difference between 40 and 60 weight is. They just know that someone said when you're doing small text, use 60, and they don't know that there's a bunch of settings that have to change the digitizing to make that work. Even people who are using these materials don't always know why they are what they are or what those terms even mean. And that's something that can be a failure for folks when they're, a lot of the times it's like you chase the thing you want to make. They're saying, okay, I want to make cool patches. Cool. You don't have to become a digitizer and an embroiderer to make cool patches or to sell cool patches. You can have those made for you. You can sell them all day long. If all you want is the item and you don't want to be part of the process, that's totally fine. Get the item. Get the item made.
At the end of the day, right? Yeah. We're business people. We're entrepreneurs. It's about making money, not necessarily doing that one thing that really isn't your core competency.
Oh, absolutely. And it's frequently the case with embroidery. I mean, or at least I found that there's two sides of it. Either I have people who coming in from another kind of decoration, don't know embroidery at all, and bring in equipment before they understand what's going on. There's that side, and those people have this problem. Or we have the other problem. It's something that I'm going to get to in our next top mistake here. We have people who are coming in who have deep technical knowledge of embroidery because they're embroidery hobbyists, but then don't have business acumen or a mind for profit, and then they suffer the other side of this thing. But the funny thing is both of them end up where they get too focused on a result, on a garment they want to make, on a thing that they want to do. Literally, they want to make embroidery because it's cool, and I can't argue with that. But they don't think about kind of the ramifications, either technically if they're printers maybe, or someone who's going from like graphic design somewhere else, or if they're coming from embroidery, they don't think about the business ramifications, the sales ramifications, and communications that go on when you have to get the stuff right for business.
Right. Cool.
All right.
So number 2.
Yes.
Alan says he's not asking you a question because he doesn't want the embroidery question back.
It's a good call, man. I would probably think with that eventually.
Hello.
Good to see Frank from over in the UK.
No idea. Cindy says, sorry she's late. And Jeff says needle sizes are like Greek to most people.
Absolutely. It's why when I teach this stuff, I invariably jump out and start talking about, measurements. Like density is measured in tenths of a millimeter. That's what an embroidery point is. It's an actual measurement you can measure with a ruler if you really wanted to. the thing is, once we start making it Greek, like he's saying, if you don't understand what these measurements mean, then you have no control. And that's why people end up where they just start throwing things at the wall because they don't have any control.
Yeah. So it's, for people who are screen printers, right?
Yeah.
It's all about standardization, reducing variables, understanding the fundamentals. Exactly what you need to do to produce the result is a certain prescribed set of steps. Are you following these steps or not?
No, totally. That's the thing. And the thing that makes it a little different is I think the variation that happens with individual garments, fabric types, stabilizers, that variation at least seems to me when you're looking at a shop that maybe most of what they do in screen printing is t-shirts and maybe a couple variations on that. They're not doing a ton of different work. If they're just kind of kicking out cotton t-shirts all day, those kind of shops, then they might struggle when you find out, a hat can't use the same file as a shirt. Or that if I put this thing on a towel or a piece of fleece, that's going to do a very different thing than if I put it on a piqué polo shirt. And those things cause some differences. Now, I think that most people do get it because, I mean, I know that when you're screen printing on a thick sweatshirt, that is not the same game as a thin t-shirt. So it should be pretty analogous. I think it's just very easy for all of us who are steeped in one side of this thing, one side of decoration, to look at the other side and not quite get what those variables are. Right. And I think that's the issue. And like we said, what usually happens is their customers have said, we want embroidery. And so the mandate they have is bring embroidery in. And so they're just thinking about the sale and the end result of handing the embroidery off, not necessarily, okay, now I have to learn this the same way I learned all, off contact and squeegee geometer and whatever else that you need to know. I mean, those things have to be learned for embroidery too. And especially when we're talking about the art and the digitizing setup, that is a very, very different world. And I remember distinctly the day that I told my art director that I was being moved into the art department from the embroidery department and that I was going to do all the digitizing at my first shop. And he looked at me and he said, they tried to get me to do this. It's an entirely new career. And I said, I know. Like I've started into this. I've been an embroiderer now. I know it's an entirely different thing. It's not the same as graphic design. It's not the same as print.
And you were willing to climb that Mount Everest and plant that flag.
Well, and honestly, I looked at him and said, I'm very glad that I'm not doing his half of it either, because I've done some printing of SEPs and some prep for that. And I used to do everything. I used to do vinyl cutting. And this is back when I was doing sign layouts and windows and one of everything. And honestly, I looked at him and said, I'm glad that I'm not looking at dot shape and, worrying about mesh sizes. I mean, we all have a lot of variables in our head, and it's very nice to niche down and be able to get deep on one of these subjects so that you have some control. So I felt the same way, honestly, but he was very much not into becoming the embroidery guy.
Right. What's number two?
Number two, honestly, goes a little bit further into the business side of things. It's not knowing your numbers. Right? Not know your numbers. And this is process. We can certainly go back and say on the technical side, this can be things like when we talked about what densities mean, thread weights, needle sizes, all of that stuff can be part of that, not knowing your numbers. And that's where you just don't understand what the metrics are that you're using to measure things or what you need to alter to get results. Well, that's the same thing on the business side. Kind of famously, I hate to say, when I'm dealing with small to medium embroiderers, especially if they come from the craft market, frequently, folks are not really thinking about production numbers. They're not thinking about how much they can get out of a day. And especially when you're talking about pricing, let me just say this here categorically, despite the fact that I will make some people very unhappy. 99 cents per thousand is BS. When someone says, what's the pricing for your embroidery? And they go, somebody told me it's $1 per thousand. $1 per thousand in San Francisco can't be $1 per thousand in Albuquerque, New Mexico can't be $1 per thousand in Manhattan, let alone in your individual shop for your individual market. Pricing is more nuanced than that. And if you don't know things like your overhead, your labor costs, to a degree, your materials costs, certainly. If you don't know these things, the fixed and the variable overhead, if you don't know what you're putting into things, and if you don't have any idea time study wise how long it takes you to get a job out the door, the chances are you're not pricing for profit, you're not figuring it in. And also, if you're really niching down saying that all of my value is based on how much production time I spend, how much material cost I have in something, and you're not thinking about value above that, you're probably missing out on a lot. I mean, but certainly none of that starts without knowing your numbers. If you don't understand how many hours you have that you're actually producing in a day, what that means for your week, what that means for your year, and you're not understanding what your equipment can do, the chances are you don't really know why you're pricing how you're pricing, and even if you're making profit, you may be doing so out of luck. I mean, it's not something that you can really adjust or manage very well because it doesn't have a measurement behind it. So when I'm talking to people who are coming out and saying, okay, how do I price this stuff? How do I know how much I can get done in a week? Certainly you have to do some work on that score. If this is your first week in, you're not going to know on Monday how much you can get done in a week. I mean, you're going to have to measure, you're going to have to watch, do some production studies, stuff like that. But over the course of time, when I'm talking to a shop that's been in it for 5 years and they're telling me they don't get pricing, they don't know how much they can get done, you need to be measuring, you need to be watching this stuff. And it's something that it's a quantity you can know. I mean, hopefully you're keeping your books and you're understanding how much you spend and also how much the labor's costing. And hopefully you've got some sort of production log to let you know, what am I getting out the door?
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, I can't imagine that's different in any part of decoration. I think the one thing that's different for embroidery is I see fewer people who are jumping up and saying, oh yeah, I was a hobbyist screen printer and then got into it. I haven't seen as much of that, where I do see a ton of people who say, I had a home embroidery machine. Somebody asked me to make a couple of garments or, rally towels for the sports team. And then now I started doing my own stuff. I see a lot more hobbyists moving into business on the embroidery side than I've seen in print myself. And so I think that's why I've encountered so much of this attitude. It's also kind of knowing your value as well. I mean, it's not just knowing your numbers. Technically, it's knowing your value. What are you providing and what is that worth to people? And not saying, okay, I love doing it. It's a hobby. It's a fun thing that I want to do. So I don't know how to charge for that. What do I charge? Or having that guilt involved with making money. Whenever I'm talking in print groups, it seems like the screen printers are just like on it. They're ready to make money. They know what they want to do. They might not know how, some of them, when they're first coming in, but they're in there to make money. They've got a business idea and they want to do it. I have more often seen in the kind of prosumer channel of embroidery, people coming in who are saying, hey, yeah, I want to do this, but then they asked me how much I charged, and I guess I took this much time, and I mean, it was already on the machine, and I have it at home, and I did it on the weekend. There's always a lot of floundering, or at least there's frequently a lot of floundering about what things should cost. And I'm like, invariably, one time per episode of the shows I do, I will stop and look at the camera and be like, these are the precious hours of your life that never come back. Please make sure you're being paid for them.
A lot of new folks, regardless of the industry, are really timid about what they charge because they've put their toe in the water. They're unsure about stuff. And I think if you've been in it a while, you're like, oh, I'm charging this, and I don't give a crap if they like it or not. This is the pride, right? And I think because that comes from a sense of confidence and knowing your worth.
Well, and I think, that also plays into the earlier question of what number one was when you misunderstand the medium. Once you know the medium and you know what you're capable of, and you're producing something that is of quality and you can trust your product, then that question is a little easier to answer. The thing that gets me is when I have people who really they're, like I said, these prosumers, these people who have essentially professional level equipment that they've bought for their hobby. Several of them, I'm looking at work that I'm like, it is equal to the commercial work I'm seeing. It's equal, it's exceeds, which I'll say this too. Everybody who gets upset about their work as an embroiderer, really as a printer, go look at retail work that people buy off the shelf. The work that's in retail stores is worse. It's crap. Yeah, it is. It's crap. Most of it's horrible compared to what I see people putting out either in the hobby sector or in the professional sector. Most of it's not as careful as what we make. So people come into it.
I'll be in a store. Yeah. I'll be looking at stuff, and I'm like doing the close examination, and the clerk will come up and like, what are you doing? It's like, oh, do you see this? He's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, oh, and you want $30 for this?
Well, that's the thing. Whenever I teach pricing and I teach value proposition, I'm like, guys, the value proposition doesn't have to come directly from the quality. I mean, I always say this, that a base level of quality is just the price of entry. If you can't make a quality garment, you shouldn't be here. I mean, if you can't make a garment that looks good, that the decoration is decent, that is registered and looks nice, you probably shouldn't be doing it. You need to get that sorted out. After that, everything is about like the associations. What is the image? How is that associated? Where is it being purchased? Is it associated with an event or a feeling that someone has? Is it, I mean, there are all these reasons why something can be there. And my best example of this is at a shop that I worked at, we sold these shirts, and these shirts were blank. All they were is we were removing a tag that was a tear out tag, and we were repackaging them individually in these nice little boxes that look, and it was going into a high-end boutique, a women's clothing boutique. These were straight off the rack t-shirts. They were a nice blank. This was a $6 blank. Don't get me wrong, but this blank is just a blank white t-shirt, something we would print on any day of the year. We're repackaging it in this little box that looks like a kind of like an alligator purse with a foil print on it. We are sitting it on a shelf for them, and these $6 blank with a 38-cent box is now $60 retail. The association with the high-end brand is all it took. And everybody swore up and down that this was the best underlayer. Yeah.
Packaging.
Yeah. Packaging and the association with the boutique. That's all it took for the value to go up $54. You know, it's like a 10x value on an object. Now, don't get me wrong. We could talk about pricing and we can talk about profit all day long. And some people would say, wow, are you gouging them? I'm like, well, we didn't set that price. We were delivering them at wholesale. Right. But even then, I'm saying the price does not have to mean I put more time into it. I put more effort into it. I put more materials into it. It has to be multimedia. It has to be super difficult, super detailed. Those things aren't necessarily why someone values it. People make emotional decisions when they buy. And so, like I said, not knowing your numbers, certainly I did kind of stress the numbers and knowing overhead, stuff like that. For me, I call that the minimum to maintain. You have to know your minimum to maintain your business and pay everybody decently so we can all live. Then after that, you want to stick, you have to be putting profit on that. I mean, I just like to know that minimum because there's too many people who say, know your break-even point. I'm like, I don't want the break-even point. I want the minimum to maintain everybody in a decent lifestyle that I've got in my shop as best I can in a reasonable wage for everybody I have here that I need, the people who I need, that labor that I need to get this done. And then I want to definitely go higher with value, go higher with presentation as well. Things that might not seem like they're that expensive. Like I said, 38-cent box. But 38-cent box that we sourced and got set up made a big difference to the value of this garment. It's stuff that you have to think about when you're trying to start pricing on value. And believe me, if you think we charged the people at this boutique the same we charge for somebody to put a single color print and printer fold that same blank, you're wrong. Mm-hmm. We charged more also because we knew what we were providing as far as value. And we were the people who sourced everything, provided the solution, designed the packaging, and got them to where they were making that profit. That's part of our value.
Right.
So,
hey, Mark Coudray, this quote, top line sales is vanity, bottom line sales is sanity.
Yep.
Right. Absolutely. It's all about the profit.
Yeah. If you're not thinking profit ahead of time, that's the other number you need to know. Are you making profit, and how much profit are you making? If you're not making profit, why are we here? Are we just, are we a big do nothing machine? I don't think so. I don't think that's useful to any of us. So yeah, think profit first, folks.
Let me tell you. So like I talk to shop owners all the time. I did this yesterday with somebody. I go, how much was your sales last year? Because this year is pretty weird, right? I go, what was your sales last year? And they told me. I go, okay, what was your profit? And they go, I don't know. So you have to know.
How are you going to judge that? How are you going to judge that? Really, it is hard to say. I'm like, if you're taking 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, it doesn't mean you could just be taking 2 steps forward and none back, and you'd be doing great, right? You'd be moving further. You have to be able to have a waypoint here, and that's knowing your numbers too.
What's number 3?
Number three is something that I kind of harp on a lot in my classes, and this is informational flow. One of the problems people have in embroidery, especially it seems like, is that they flub that flow. They end up with a lot of regressions. They end up where they don't get the information they need on the lead end, and then they don't move that information through their shop in an efficient manner and make sure that it's centralized and easy to get to. It's incredible to me to find shops that are still working. And by the way, I'm not calling anybody out. If this is you, don't feel bad. If you're still working on the manila envelope method right now, and you have a disc or even a USB stick that you're sticking in an envelope and handing off, and you're moving all of your critical information around that way, think really hard about that. I have seen people lose thousands of dollars because a sticky note was on the bottom of an operator's foot instead of on a job. You don't want that to happen.
Or went too close to the hoop, and then you got erased by the magnets.
Right? Yeah, floppy disks. People are still using floppies right now. I'm not saying that you have to toss the machines out. Go get a USB converter or a network converter, whatever you got to do. I think the best thing you can do with this is just to think that you have to have first good interview skills. Make sure as close as you can to get all the information you need to get the job done on the initial interview. It's not that you're not going to have discussions with your customer, or that there may not be breaks in between where you discuss things or where they come back to you with something different or you have ideas, whatever. That can happen. But when we're going to production, by the time I'm going to digitize, I should not be asking a lot of questions about what's important, about where something's going. I shouldn't have to be constantly asking those questions, because once we do that, once you go to digitizing, if folks don't know digitizing well, it's a lot harder to edit than vector. Every letter may be made out of 3 or 4 or 5 objects, and each of those objects is a separate little vector that has, stitch properties and stitch angles and compensation added to it, and has to be done in sequence. Embroidery machines run specifically in sequence. Every little item has to both be in sequence, in layers, and has to move in an apparent motion that is efficient if it's being done well. So once we go to digitizing, the editing is really hard to manage, and it is a pain. If somebody comes to you and starts editing things, also, if they want to do this, and I saw a comment down here from Jeff Fuller, he says, I quote unquote, I need that 2 inches smaller. With embroidery, the scale sets a lot of what the choices we make, because there is a known physical object, that thickness of the thread and how close those threads can be together for us to see through them, or to have details that are separate for holes on letters to stay open. We have these minimum sizes, and also how long a stitch can be before it really needs to be broken up. We have a maximum size. We start scaling too much, and it changes the literal choices we make as, if you want to say embroidery artists, as digitizers, in our interpretation of the art. So not knowing things like the colors we're going on, that also affects densities and how much stitching we put in order to kind of have a nice hand where something flows and you don't get that bulletproof cardboard logo that we've all seen people who are poor embroiderers make when they're trying to cover up the background. You have to know things like your background colors. You have to know things like what kind of material you're going on, how large the piece is intended to be. Honestly, I like to ask these other questions. Those are the good embroiderer questions. The great embroiderer questions are, how is this going to be viewed? Who is going to be using this? What part of this information or design is the most important for you to have a customer see? What are you trying to impart? What kind of message do you want to get across? These are the things that make you a consultant and not just a commodity who's, like I said, replicating art instead of having an interpretation. So these things are all in that initial interview process. You don't do that interview process well, and invariably, you're going to be constantly contacting people up the chain. You're going to be going back to the customer and pestering them later, making changes to things. If you are outsourcing digitizing, which many embroiderers are, you're going to be contacting that person over and over and doing the waiting game to get things fixed. And especially when we're talking about physical location. Now, this is a very different world where people are coming to your physical location, and maybe it's not as prevalent. We're going to have to work on that, especially when we talk about things like color matching. But if you have somebody in your shop, especially now when people don't want to have multiple visits to your shop, very likely, they need to be selecting colors, or you need to work with them to get colors selected correctly, because color matching with embroidery is a very difficult animal, because it's a thing that reflects light differently depending on stitch angle and dimension. So
yeah, let me tell you. So, one of the things that I've always done is on the production floor is all of the execution is handled in production. Yeah. All of the thinking is done up front. So absolutely. Kind of the analogy I've always used is the front office is the architect.
Yeah.
The back of the shop, right? They're the builder, right? You're not going to let your carpenter decide how the front of the house is going to look, right? Absolutely. The architect's designing that. So anything about how the image should look, how many inches down or over or whatever, the thread color, like, so if you're doing a tonal embroidery, right? So it's a charcoal gray shirt, you're supposed to go tonal embroidery. Oh, what does that mean? Does that mean lighter? Does that mean a little darker? What does that mean? Who's picking the thread colors out? It can't be the embroidery staff because they're busy.
Yeah.
It needs to be somebody up front with a thread chart, with the garment, and this is all approved by the client. way in advance. So when you're running a job, you're just like you're on the racetrack, right?
Oh, 100%. In fact, people who don't know, Marshall and I both write for a magazine, Images magazine out in the UK. We both have articles in that every month. And I just wrote a piece that is not out yet, but there's a piece I just wrote where they said, okay, how do we manage things that are going wrong? We have small staff. How do we do our best to make things more efficient? Mm-hmm. And one of the big things I harped on was that all decisions should be made before production starts. Yep. There should be no decisions. By the time somebody picks something up for production, I even had this included in physical workflow where I'm like, okay, I want everything queued up at the machine. I want every machine to have everything mise en place. Everything is right where I can reach it with my eyes closed if I need a tool. I know right where everything is at all times. All the things that an operator needs to do should be within their immediate circle. And on top of that, when we're talking about informational flow, all decisions have to be made. And what I also say to people is you think about it this way. If you have almost a client model inside of your own shop, production, they are being delivered a product by the artists and the salespeople who are talking to everyone up front. They're talking to the customer. Their product they have to deliver. They deliver a finished product, which is all of the instructions and all the information that needs to be there for them to do the production. And they should not have to be contacted again. I always say this, if you're wondering how it should go, if tomorrow you stepped off the curb and got hit by a bus, God's forbid that you should be hurt and that you shouldn't be there, any job you were currently involved in should continue sailing right along without you. That's the best way to handle information in my book. Anything that you've done, when you hand it off, you should not expect to hear about it again. Don't get me wrong. Will you? Surely you will. This is the real world. Things happen. Things change. There are problems. Your aim should be to deliver a complete package where no one needs to call you to make sure the next step gets done.
Right. Somebody brings their work order. Trying to do the camera. Somebody brings their work order up front and goes, "Hey, what's this mean?" It means you didn't put the order in right. That's what it means.
Absolutely.
So,
and I've had people say this all the time too. They're like, "Oh, well, what if the people in the back are stupid?" Number one,
for you.
why are you hiring these people? Number two, the likelihood that they are probably not is probably something you can improve in your own communication. And number three, okay, let's say that you think they're stupid, but you're not willing to get rid of them. I guess it's time for you to learn how to communicate with stupid people. It's time for you to learn what you need to do to communicate correctly so that those people can get the job done. I think that internal strife thing, like I said, never show a customer internal strife. It's ridiculous. But you know that there's a chance for you to improve your communication if you're constantly having a failure there. Absolutely. If you've got dead wood, cut out the dead wood. You don't need somebody who can't do their job. However, if it's always breaking down because your colors aren't entered correctly, learn to enter the colors correctly and make sure you're making that a point before you run back there. There are certain things that are just inexcusable with the information. There's no reason to keep doing that.
I think instructions should be as simple that a 4-year-old can understand it or a German Shepherd.
Pretty much. Yeah. I mean, by the time I'm on a machine, I don't want that.
I don't need a paragraph, just a bullet point.
Yeah.
And the other thing we're talking about, developing your organization skills. Mm-hmm. I like to do the scavenger hunt the day before.
Oh, yeah.
So you've like for, what is today? Thursday, right? For Friday's production, I'm pulling all of the goods. I'm pulling all of the shirts, the samples, the cones of thread, everything, and lining it up for tomorrow. So when the crew comes in, all I got to do is run the jobs, and they're not looking.
Absolutely. That my entire point for that is I call it production queuing, and I like to have a literal physical queue just like you do. Before that production shift starts, not only do they have each job with all of the garments pulled and marked and referenced to the file, they've got the canonical sample, they've got the thread colors, and then they have the next jobs in a row in order of production laid out. That's because they shouldn't have to make thoughts. Now, don't get me wrong. There are certain things that change. Like, let's say we have a ton of hats and flats in the shop. So tubular stuff that's going to run like shirts and jackets or whatever. And then you have a bunch of hats. I can see running things out of, what you would call a conventional production order for delivery so that you keep your hat gauges on your one machine. If you have a multi-head machine that's got hats on it right now, you're going to have to switch it.
You can bundle stuff together, right?
Bundling and chunking is fine. I'm not saying it's as something comes in, that's the first in, first out. Not all the time. But you have done that thought ahead of time. You have chunked these things together, and actually individually in production, I like to do it where when we're talking about something that has, say, sized groupings and individual kind of personalization, I'll even chunk by size and color so that when they load a file, they know that until that file is done spitting out names, it only takes red medium of this garment. Yep. So that really the least amount of thought goes into production possible. Production should be watching like a hawk to make sure production is going well, maybe hooping the next run, of course. If you've got somebody who is just, on top of the game, they can be trimming too. I like to have a finishing department separate, but if you got a smaller shop, then they're probably doing some finishing as well. But really, it's all about production at that point, and all that decision-making should be done.
Yep. So next, proactive change. We know we need to make some changes because we're not doing it right. So Erich, where do we start with all this?
Where do we start? I think part of it is knowing our lane. We talked about this earlier. I did say, misunderstanding the medium is a problem. That's number one. Well, I say if you really want to get into embroidery and make it your thing, you have to develop some deep knowledge. This doesn't mean that we're going to, become, MFAs in fiber arts. We're not going to come out there and necessarily be like that. We do need to know our medium, and we need to know the garments that we use the most and how they operate. What I say to people, even if they're never going to digitize, learn enough digitizing so you can communicate with the digitizer and the both are on the same page. You know what's going on. You don't need to know how to digitize to understand that these letters need a little bit more pull compensation for them to hit the border. That is something you can understand basically. So I'd say develop some of that deep knowledge, understand your terminology. Don't just throw things at it. You have to actually understand what happens when your machine starts stitching, what is going on in the file, why does it matter? If embroidery is your game, learn that or hire someone that does. You need that knowledge. So when you're talking about that misunderstanding the medium, that's the thing. Part of what you actually do, the physical thing you do to keep that going, sampling and running. If you want to have your operators understand this stuff, take known good files, have them watch those files run and analyze it. Look at the file on screen, look at the sample as it stitches out, notice the differences between the two and understand why it's happening. If they can take classes, great. There's a lot of webinars out there. I know I did one this year that has been out there and talking about more next level stuff, but there's a ton of beginner stuff. You can talk to your software providers, often have these classes available. Make time for your operators to get educated. Make time for your sales staff to understand what digitizing can do. If you have to hire a digitizer's time to have a class with your sales staff to help them explain what's going on, you have to have a consultant come in, do that, so that when your sales staff goes to talk to someone directly about embroidery, they know what is possible, what isn't possible. They're not running back and forth. So first thing,
training.
Training.
It takes time. It takes money. Yes. So if somebody's doing the training, they're not doing the normal job. You got to have somebody cover for them, get it on the calendar, plan for it. Because if you don't do that, what happens is it's 3 months have gone by and you still haven't done anything and you're still where you were.
I mean, I'm not going to tell everybody it's Google 20% time. I'm not saying every fifth day is entirely training time, but a couple hours a week is not too much to ask. A couple of paid hours, trust me, you're going to be happy you did it in how much time you save. Even we just talk about that sales example I just said. How much time do you think you waste in a week with a salesperson saying, I don't know if that text to work, I think it's too small. Let me go talk to the digitizer and then I'll get back to you. How much time do you think you lost in that exchange instead of they learn that stuff by heart over the course of a couple of workshops, 2 to 4 hours. And then for the rest of their lives, they go, I took a ruler to the finished size. I sized it to the size you wanted, and I'm seeing that these letters are about 3 millimeters tall. It's not going to happen. We're going to have to make them 5 millimeters, or I'm going to have to change some stuff. Is that okay? And now we've taken the 5-6 emails and discussions they might have had with the digitizer or the art staff, whoever, and the 2 or 3 emails it took with the client, and they're gone. We've lost that forever. I mean, there's nothing to tell you anything more than that. You don't need to know any more than that, but that you will save time, and time is money. We all know that that's opportunity costs. That is literal labor costs. Training is just valuable, folks. And so honestly, get some training. And when we're talking about embroidery, I think medium is a big thing. People don't really understand, like I said, stabilizers, threads, tensions, and the basics of digitizing. If those are things that anybody who is touching embroidery should get.
Needle size.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, needle size and thread thickness, it's something we could have done this in 5 minutes here. I can teach you what you need to know. It's not that it's all that deep. I said deep knowledge. What I mean by deep knowledge is just more than the surface of, I want embroidery, get me this. Here's my colors and here's my art. Deep enough to know that if we have a super textured garment, we might have to do something different than we have a smooth garment. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about deep knowledge. Or the fact that if I have something incredibly thin and stretchy, that's not going to operate the same as something thick and stable. So yeah.
Hey, Wendy asked, do you have an instruction worksheet template? Do you got something they can download?
I don't think I have something that is universal. So no, I probably do not have something right on, but you know what? That is a good thing I should think about. I know, right? I should be able to break that out. And I'll say one of the reasons I don't have that is people usually use their software for a good portion of that. A lot of the instruction template is generated in their software because that's going to give you color changes and sequence pretty readily. The one thing I will say, some people, I like to use a hard copy, believe it or not, when we're talking about the interview process. Some people will say, really, you'll have people writing, but when we're talking about things like placement and positioning, sometimes sketching that is easier, honestly, than trying to write a description of it. So sometimes that can work for you. So I'd say your interview template is pretty interesting there. Other than that, most of the time it's going to be, left chest design is going to be a left chest. It's going to be slightly different positioning, all the different sizes. And it's something that you should know as with your clients and with your production department. I will say if you're using things like hooping aids, then we can talk about hooping aids that actually have, say, grid-based systems where you can say, place it at, this grid and work from there. But other than that, most people are generally using fairly general terminology. And honestly, one of the other reasons I don't do that, I'm a big advocate of centralized information systems. So whether we're talking about your, I can use brands, I suppose. It doesn't really matter. I'm not advocating any one brand, but we used to use, say, Shopworks, or if you Deco Network or Asoft or any of these online setups that have production involved in them, they will often have all of that laid out and they kick out production documents. So yeah, honestly, the worksheet is maybe a little bit more archaic, but you can use a worksheet. If I can, I'll make sure I'll put that in the back of my head for something I probably need to have now.
That sounds like an article to me, Eric. I don't know.
No, like I said, I'm sitting here with I'm like Terry Combs, our friend from the Two Regular Guys. I'm ready to go write in my little legal pad while we're talking because that's something I need to actually take care of.
Right. So let's talk about continuous improvement. So we know we need to improve, right? Yes. So how do we get that out of our skull, just like you're doing, writing things down, and actually into some action?
Well, you know what? We talked about with the first part of it, training, by scheduling the time. Marshall hit it right on the head. If you don't schedule the time, it won't get done. So schedule the time, buy the online workshop access, whatever it is that you need to do, and get your people into it. Because once it becomes part of the culture and the kind of purpose that you have laid out for you, then you have a much better chance of getting this thing to happen. Also, top down. If you're the person who's at the top and you're not doing any sort of studying or training for yourself for what you need to do, your people below you aren't going to probably see it either. I think if you're not improving, they're not improving. Certainly, we talked about not knowing your numbers, the continuous improvement there, collecting data, do work studies, have production sheets. Definitely.
Yeah, switch to that one.
Yes, but this is right. This is one of Marshall's favorite quotes. You can't manage what you don't measure. Start measuring. If you're not taking stock of what you're actually producing, or the other thing I see that's heartbreaking is people will get the idea, like I said earlier, of the informational flow, and they'll go, okay, I've got a centralized system, even if it's a spreadsheet on Google Docs so everybody can see it and everything gets recorded. Or they'll buy a centralized system that has everything laid out for them and use 40% of it. They'll use it for job information because they understand it's a pain in the butt when whoever's on the operations side calls them for a thread color. They get that pain, but then they don't have the person doing the operation write down anything about the time jobs were in and out or how much spoilage there was or anything else. And so the system has a chunk of information in it that's useful to production, but not useful for analysis. So start collecting the information you need for analysis. If you're going to know your overhead, you need to know what you're spending. Collect that and make sure it's there. I assume you're doing that for tax purposes now. If you're not, well, gee, it's probably a good time to start that. And honestly, anything else you're spending, the time you're spending on things, or it's time to do some work studies. It's time to do time studies and say, okay, I really want to know on the average polo shirt with a 8,000 plus stitch logo, which is pretty average for what we're doing in my shop, how long does it really take me to get 25 shirts from the start of this thing to the end of this thing? I've got, say you're running a fleet of single heads, might be a little different than a multi-head and a single head. Let's find out what that mix looks like and what makes sense, because it lets us make a lot of different decisions. Not only does it just make you able to improve things like your efficiency or to look at what the problem is. If it varies a lot from file to file, you might find out that maybe you're hiring files out from somebody who's not very efficient at digitizing. You might find out that you're having problems with your thread breakage. You might have problems. If you start to write down why problems happen, how long things take, how much you're spending, you can now look for where these issues occur and eliminate problems. And we can also make different decisions with that. If you look at the kind of jobs that are coming in and you say, okay, well, I'm getting a lot of small, highly customized jobs. Maybe I don't want to buy a new multi-head. I want to start building, like I said, a fleet of single heads because that makes more sense to my product mix. All of these things come from knowing what's going in, what's going out, and the time it takes and the money you're spending. All that has to be measured. So big thing there, measure it. The last section of that, I talked about flubbing, kind of informational flow, and then we went on into like physical workflow and everything together. The last part of that is to actually go through your own process, run through an order, watch it actually run. Especially if you've been in business for a while, we can get lazy and not actually taste our own dog food. We don't dog food the product. We don't see how it actually works. Especially if you have e-commerce involved, whenever I talk, e-commerce is a big thing. People don't always know the steps that are involved in running their shop or what an order actually looks like for a customer. Run down an order at every step and watch how it's working. Also down to the point of looking at shop workflow. Where is everybody walking around? Are they wasting time in one area or another? Are they looking for a particular tool all the time? Are they constantly looking for this kind of information? Follow a job all the way through the process. See where things are breaking down and take notes. You have to be a bit of a detective.
A really good tool for that is this. Your phone. You can film things with your phone. Film people working. If you have a shop with security cameras, it's really great to use the security camera footage. If you played sports like I did, I played football. We watched game film after the game. What happened? Atkinson, why'd you miss that tackle?
Yeah, right.
So it's like one of these things we can learn from it. So when you see your embroidery operator just walk off camera, right? Where did they go? What happened, right? This is a really great learning tool for that. I go to shops all the time, and like the first chunk of me being there when I'm helping them with efficiency is what I call discovery, which is just standing there watching people work and taking notes and seeing where they're going and what they're doing. And, do they have to walk all the way across the floor for a pair of scissors? Do they have what they need? Is there a tape gun if they're trying to box up the box or whatever they're doing, right? Do they have everything they need? And a lot of times they don't. And what you'll see is they'll put their name on it, right, on whatever the thing is, because somebody keeps taking it. Well, owner, just buy 20 sets, right? Just buy enough, right? So everybody can have whatever it is.
Oh, yeah. It blows me away because invariably what we started to do in a lot of shops I've been in, we'll start just having a color code where you're like, okay, the feet on this machine or some part of the machine has a little color swatch painted on it. And we have a toolbox that goes to that machine that's that color. And every one of the tools for that color has a stripe, on the back of the tool that's that color. And we're like, it's at a glance, you're like, okay, if the whatever magenta hammer is in the wrong place, you're like, all right, quit doing that, guys. Every tool needs to go back to its box. We all know where they're from. They don't belong to anybody, but they all go to where they go. They have a workstation. Right. And that's a super simple version of this thing, because a lot of this can also be like, hey, we need to go ahead and put in networking so that we're sending the files directly to the machine. Maybe if we're a large enough shop, maybe we want to introduce barcoding or something else where we're pulling files so that the person isn't constantly asking a person who is the only person who knows how to load files to get files and put them where they need to go. There are higher tech things that happen, but it is shocking how many times it's, I need a snip, I need the screwdriver that it takes to replace a needle. That kind of stuff. It's shocking how many times somebody's walking to a central cabinet in a shop. There's one big cabinet that for some reason they're locking down or that is not in a good position for every machine that they have to walk to keep going and getting supplies or whatever. It's like, buy 2 sets of everything, buy as many sets as it takes for the machines, have them within reach, and make it easy, because the cost of that stuff might look bad on the first buy, maybe if you're really concerned about the stuff, but you need this investment is minuscule over time.
Yeah. And think about how much money you want your machine to generate an hour.
Yeah.
What is that dollar figure for you?
Yeah.
Was it $100 an hour, $500 an hour, whatever it is, right? So these minutes add up, at $300 an hour, right? That's $5 a minute.
Oh, and this is also when people talk to me about digitizing and I hear them complaining about digitizing fees. If you have a really solid digitizer, sincerely, that person is worth their weight in gold, because if you can remove 4 minutes off of a run, and then you have 28 runs in a day, and let's say that customer is going to be with you for 4 or 5 years, the amount of time that you save on an efficient file versus an inefficient file is incredible. You can end up adding an entire run every day. Yep. And if you can add, let's say we have 48 heads, we're going to add 48 pieces a day. It's incredible. You can't overestimate how important it will be to remove all the extra color stops, trims, changes, and stops, all the kind of stoppage. Or when somebody is technically bad, they literally cause garments to be ruined, and now we have spoilage and time lost. So yeah, there are certain things not to cheap out on. Individual tools for stations, absolutely. I would say, like you said, informational management and for sure files.
So Mike says, I hate walking to the other side of my 12 head for a pair of snips.
Yeah.
And then John wrote the whole, we can't even see each other now.
The gist is titanium needles versus
needles to
steel.
Titanium for structural ball caps. They would still break, but I could hear the needle point crush before it broke down. Lately, I find that breaking more and more, and the steel ones just get bent. But when the steel ones break, they shatter in a million pieces. What do you advise for either a dense patch, like a design, or an average 8,000 stitch embroidery with a medium size and then a cut off, whatever he was going to tell you?
Honestly, if you are consistently breaking needles due to the density of your design, your digitizer sucks. And I don't want to be that guy, because that's mean for me to say that, but you shouldn't be putting so much density in a design that you're causing a needle to break, to deflect and hit the needle plate and break. Digitizers who use too much thread to get color coverage are not very careful, and sometimes if they're not very aware of how coverage works, they might not use underlay or other methods to get you there, to get you to full coverage of the background. And that's where you have those kind of problems. Now, if you're talking about hats, the other thing is, if you have a hat that constantly causes needle breakage, quit offering that hat to your client. There are hats that are just harder to run. And if you have to steam it or hit it with a hammer or work it in your hands to get it soft enough for the seam not to break needles, stop selling that hat. And I know that sucks when people like a certain style of hat or get used to a certain kind of hat, unless there is a really compelling reason and you're making a ton of profit on it. Or jack the price of the hats up because you know you're going to break needles and have trouble. But whatever it is, unless you're making profit for a reason that you absolutely cannot get away from that hat, get a better hat. Same with thread breakage. If you find that one brand of thread doesn't break and the other does, or you're using cheap thread that breaks, or you're not storing your thread well, like people store their thread out in the open on big racks, and so it's dusty and dry and out to the elements. It's visible, looks really pretty. Customer can come see it. But if it's in bins, then you don't have dust and damage and all that with your thread. When you're having that breakage, spend a little money on storage, spend a little money on the better thread, spend a little money, or change what kind of cap you're running and eliminate the problem. Don't just suffer it,
Yep.
You're the one offering that.
For Eric?
Yeah, any last questions?
He can answer them.
I'm certainly willing. Yeah, as Justin says here, Justin's like, preach, Eric. Yeah, I have a tendency to get on the old soapbox when it comes to this stuff. I can't help it. I want you guys to make more money.
Hey, while we're waiting for more questions, let's talk about training. One of my favorite things to do was to work people in. They start off maybe as trimmers, and then they start helping somebody hoop, especially for those, 1,000 stitch little bitty logos, right? Helping them hoop, and then they're going to go onto the machine. What's your best way to build a training program?
Oh, honestly, you've got it 100% is to have somebody in front of that machine, because anytime somebody says also like, okay, how do I get someone to digitize? They always ask me, how do I learn to digitize? And I'm like, the best way to learn to digitize is to be an operator. Nothing will teach you the pain of a bad design like being on a machine running a bad design. So when we're talking about developing training program for embroidery, I very much like to see people getting operation time in no matter where you expect them to end up. I also like to see promoting from within. Like you say, I don't want to see necessarily, like I said, it's harder to get, for me at least. I've had more trouble getting a graphic design person to become a digitizer who's technically capable, even though they will generally tend to be artistically better. It's harder to get that done than for me to get an operator to be a decently technical digitizer who may or may not be as artistic. So that's the thing. When you're talking about technical stuff, you're doing something that's like logo work, team sports, really pretty simple stuff, but you want it to be technically good. I like to see somebody on a machine. And if I have somebody who's into design, I stick them on a machine if they want to become digitizers. Operation is the key of this thing. So being involved on the production floor is, I think, the biggest thing. So cross-training within embroidery means that you get on a machine. No matter who you are, you get on a machine or near a machine so you see how these things work. Also, I like people to be able to judge what they're doing. So I like a digitizer to talk to people who are in operation and finishing, because they're going to help them see and know what to look for when there are problems that need to be adjusted. So I like operators, even if they're never going to digitize, I like to learn some digitizing. I even like people like trimmers and finishers to learn some of that too, because then they become your QA. And throughout the process, you need that quality assurance. You need people to check on what's going on.
Right. I love cross training. And I like my thing that I've been writing about forever is that I call it the rule of three, which is for every core thing that you have, you need at least 3 competent people who know how to do it. And that way, when Betty's on vacation, Billy's going to be involved. Well, what happens if he's sick, right? You're just not sewing today? You're just not shipping today? No. You need a third person, right?
Oh, yeah. And on top of that, the thing people get cowed by is that there's super highly technical stuff that you can't necessarily do that with very easily. Your graphic design department, if you have in-house art or in-house digitizing, that's something you can't just train anybody to do in an afternoon. But when we're talking about you ever have a problem getting a file that the digitizer made from the computer where it's at onto the machine, there is no reason that multiple people in the shop shouldn't be able to do that. Basic operations of the machine, loading and starting the design, stopping it when something's going wrong, basic hooping, trimming, these aren't rocket science. They don't take a lot of time to do. Everyone should be able to do them. If you've got somebody who's pulling shirts, the person who's pulling shirts and screen printing can learn how to trim and embroidery and vice versa. These are not the super skilled setup things, and these should be easy to cross-train and should be cross-trained.
Yeah. So I have a skills inventory that I'll post in the chat on this. It's just a spreadsheet. And so what I do with this is you just put all your employees' names in it, and then you can rate them from 0 to 10. 0 means they have no clue what it is. 10 means they're a rock star. They should be teaching classes on it. And you just rate them where they are on these different levels, and it's a spreadsheet, so you can always add things to it. And then what's really great about this is if you're building your training program and you know that you need some operators, like we all know, right? Holiday, we're really super busy with gifts and all that kind of stuff, and hopefully that'll be strong this year too, right? So, we know we're going to be crushed with this stuff.
Yeah.
Why not get more people trained right now when it's slower, right? And they have time and it's not as crazy, and they can, you can be running that job slower or whatever and take a minute to show them how to do it. And that way, by the time you're really crazy busy, you've got trained, competent staff. And in sports, there's a term for this. It's called bench strength, right?
Yeah.
And so championship teams, they don't win just with their starters. Right, because we all need to have a break, right? So bench strength is how that works.
Let me tell you what that is when only your starter's good. That's called single point failures. If you have a single point that everything has to go through in each department, that person's going to be sick someday. That person's going to need a surgery. That person's going to go to another. If they're your rock star, they're going to go to another job someday. And you hope that they get so good that they eventually do something amazing with themselves. That shouldn't be critical and shouldn't mean that your whole team fails. So really, that's what you have to do. Marshall's got it. You got to have that bench strength. You have to be a little deeper, right?
Yeah. Jan says, truth, I'm not so good at embroidery work. And someone like me learn the basics. then learn more advanced training?
There's multiple places to go. It really depends on what's most convenient to you, or if you're kind of a hands-on learner or somebody who is not as hands-on. These days, luckily, everyone's getting into online education, whether it's through the trade show circuits, they're all going to online education webinars now, or if you're looking for whoever you have for your equipment. So if you've had whoever you bought your equipment from, whatever brand they are, almost everybody at this point is doing direct training that's some sort of video-based training that will help you with basics. Look to that. Also, I know it sounds cheesy and unbelievable, but read your manual. The manuals for things actually have information. I tell people all the time, everybody knows I'm in the Brilliance headquarters right now. I can't tell you how many times I've said, so did you look at the manual for the software? Because it actually teaches you a bunch of stuff, not only about pushing buttons in software, but most of the softwares out there have like information about how embroidery works in the manual. The information is in front of you at a couple of key presses, and you just aren't looking. So look to your official documentation. That's your manual. That's the training stuff that comes directly from whoever you bought equipment from or software from. Go to, like I said, webinars for either trade shows or from individual industry groups who are doing webinars. We've got a lot of those groups around here that we can certainly call out. And then also, I would say this is the one you have to be careful with. There's community support. Be really careful with this. When you get into a Facebook group or an online group or whatever, there's a good chance that people have gotten things that they've made work but aren't really efficient or great. But if you take the temperature in there as as absolute newbie, I'd be very careful with that and start with your official documentation and your educators who have some kind of known quantities behind them. People who have been in the industry. Start with them, and then when you have some specific questions, it's pretty common that if you have like a user group for a particular software or a machine, that they may know some ins and outs of things that they can answer quickly, faster than you can get a hold of a tech. So that's kind of where I keep it. Start with that official stuff first. If you're looking, like I said, if you're strapped and your operational costs don't allow you for a lot of training, start with that official documentation and with the free video stuff they're going to put out. And then move on to, like I said, get some training from industry professionals who aren't attached necessarily to a brand.
Yeah, and I would also say, don't be afraid to fail. Get some junk shirts and stuff that you can experiment on, and just really ruin the crap out of them. Absolutely. And learn how to do it. Make lots of mistakes. That's how you're going to learn.
And this is the thing. Look at it on screen. Look at the way it's put together. Run it, even if you ruin it, measure the difference between the two, and now you know what the adjustments are. It's really that simple in a lot of ways. If you're already, by the time you've already run something and ruined it, it has all the information you need in it if you watched it run. So watch it like a hawk, measure the differences. Now in embroidery, you pretty much have the keys if you were really paying attention. So that's the other thing too. Everybody, I understand that it's boring for some of you, for a lot of us. Watch some designs run on the machine, and I mean watch them. Not start it and walk away, not start it and turn your bag, not start it and get on your phone and play Candy Crush. Start the machine and watch it run. Do some short ones first, some really low stitch count ones first, so that you don't, bore yourself out of your skull if that's something that bothers you. For me, I still watch designs run. I'm apparently a glutton for punishment. I still want to watch my first runs every time I digitize something. But watching the run gives you not only all the stresses that are in the material and what they do as they run, it also shows you things like sequencing and the apparent direction of the needle, which we call pathing, through the design and how they affect it. Watching the run is one of the best, most educational things you can do. And like I've said this a million times, I always tell people, I'm like the patron saint of ruined embroidery causes. I have ruined more garments than you can imagine, especially if you're just starting out. I absolve you now. You can tell everybody that I said it was okay. Go ahead and ruin some garments. You won't catch up to me anytime soon. Everybody ruins stuff. And honestly, the failure is the best educator you have.
That's right. That's right. And by the way, if you're looking for a safe space to post questions and comments, I happen to know one. Bam, right here, shirtlabtribe.com. This is our new area. We just had our Shirt Lab Summit a couple of weeks ago, which was an online education event that we did. Shirt Lab Tribe is our new community for decorated apparel folks, and this is where you can go. And it's a professional space. It's highly moderated and curated. We don't allow the craziness that you're going to see on just a normal Facebook group. This is a subscription thing, so it's a pay to get in. Right now, it's $47 a month for the first 100 shops that get in. And then once our beta because we just launched it, once our beta period's over, it's going to go to $97 a month. But your $47 a month will be forever. It will never raise it on you. And there's a lot of fantastic people in there. And we every Thursday, we have some learning presentations. And we just had one. I know this is an embroidery thing, but we just had one on screen printing better whites with my good friend Alan, who's watching.
Awesome.
And so it's a good spot. And then Erich, actually, he's going to be presenting at Shirt Lab Dallas live next year. It would have been this year. If the zombie apocalypse hadn't happened, we would have been there. But it's now going to be next March. So.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, and that's the thing, folks. Sometimes groups with a little barrier to entry, like I said, there's lots of groups in Shirt Lab Tribe. I know Marshall and there's everybody there has been really kind of making this a safe space there. But there are groups that have a little barrier to entry that you pay for, and sometimes that's better because you end up with some professionals who have some skin in the game. The truth of the matter is every Facebook group isn't of the same quality, and you have to watch for that. So there's nothing wrong with looking for a professional group, and also, like I said. Hiring a consultant, going and taking classes from someone who's a known industry veteran or an industry person. At least you kind of have an idea of what you're going to get, and you can also talk to other people who have been in their classes before or been in their groups before and see, take the temperature. There's nothing wrong with that. So, talk to your fellow decorators and kind of figure that out.
All right. And so if you got any extra questions, here's Erich's email. I'm sure he would love to answer anything you throw at him.
I'm sometimes slow, but I always get back. I will admit that I am not always the quickest reply in the world right now, but I do try and answer everything that I get, folks.
Yeah, and here's mine also, Marshall@MarshallAtkinson.com.
He's a lot better than
you guys. I think that's going to be it. Oh, we got a comment or two. Keith says, Shirt Lab and Shirt Lab Tribe are amazing. Well worth it. Thanks for the shout out. And Jan says, thank you. She can't wait to ruin a bunch of stuff.
You know what? Like I said, I look back at my first jobs and they make me cringe. Don't feel bad. You're going to ruin stuff. Give yourself that leeway now. If you aren't ruining, and I'll say this too, I say this to people when someone goes, I never ruin anything. I go, oh, you're not trying real hard. You're not learning anything.
My pencil doesn't have an eraser.
If you're not ruining stuff, you're not trying hard enough. You're not out on the edge far enough.
Yep. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us. Erich, don't click off after this thing ends. But thank you so much, everybody, for watching. And we'll see you next week with Nick Wood from Graphics Source. We'll be here to talk about outsourcing your art department. So we'll see you then. Thank you.
See you, everybody.